This week I'm moving on from Silent Assault, a terrible Contra wannabe, on the NES, to an SNK brawler, also featured on the NES. To be exact, I'm checking out P.O.W, with the subtitle of Prisoner of War. Although I think that's a bit redundant of a title, it is what it is. Again, is it a subtitle or just trying to spell out the acronym? Who knows? Anyway, P.O.W is at its core a beat-em-up game, not unlike games like Double Dragon. It has an interesting premise to it. You play as a Special Forces operative named Bart, who is tasked to intentionally get himself captured into a POW camp so that he can infiltrate it and assassinate some higher-ups on the enemy forces. You're never told what nation you are fighting against, so just fill in any nation you may have gripes with. Bart starts by setting off some sort of explosion on his cell door, and then the game begins. It's actually a pretty neat intro, but it's a shame that not too much more is done with it. Instead of 1,000 soldiers running towards you and shooting on sight, you're assaulted by a ton of guys who wish to go hand-to-hand with you. Sure, some of them carry knives and even some M16s, but there's not enough here to make the whole POW camp believable. If they were going for realistic, you'd be dead within seconds because every soldier would have a firearm. But hell, what do I know? So Bart's whole task is to go through 4 stages punching and kicking enemy soldiers and defeating any bosses that may rise their heads. Sadly, there's not a ton of enemy variety though. You have your standard green soldiers who sometimes just waltz right past you, not even batting an eye. You have guys in tan uniforms who typically wield knives and sometimes will throw them at you. Sometimes they'll even have grenades, in which they'll throw them at you and then run away. What kind of pansy military is this? Anyway, there's also guys in bright blue uniforms, who are the acrobatic kind. I mean, who do you know that can jump that freaking high? These guys should be playing for the NBA. By the looks of the equipment the enemy army uses, they'll probably get paid a hell of a lot more. Anyway, it's your standard left to right, punch every enemy sort of deal. The game moves forward, a few enemies appear, you dispatch them, and then continue on. Every once in a while, you'll see some sort of hut or cave that you can enter. These side areas are what you find the small amounts of power-ups that are available. These come in 3 forms. One is a set of brass knuckles, which drastically increases your attack power. One is a letter A, which stands for armor. It doesn't increase your defense or life any. Instead, if an enemy shoots at you or throws a knife, if it hits you, it'll just bounce off. These 2 power-ups will go away after taking too much damage, although the actual amount is unknown since it seems to be pretty random. The third thing you can find in these huts are a letter L, which stands for life. Other than dying and respawning, these power-ups are the only way you can restore your life, and it does so to the maximum. As for weapons, there's only effectively 3. You can knock knives out of your enemy's hands, but only specific enemies. Not everyone that wields a knife will drop it when attacked. In fact, more often than not, the enemy forces don't drop their weapons. And that includes the second weapon, a gun. The strange thing about the knife is that you can't stab with it. Instead, you can only kick or throw it. Seems like a waste, but it does kill many enemies in one hit. Oddly enough though, the gun can be used to either shoot or smack people with the butt of it, although that attack is fairly slow and doesn't do any extra damage. Shooting enemies will kill anyone that the bullets strike. Again, just because an enemy carries a gun doesn't mean that they're going to drop it when they fall. Seems a little bit strange, but that's how the game works. The final weapon you can find is a grenade, but those only fall during 2 of the boss battles. Although the knife is a typical weapon in brawlers, having a gun is a refreshing change, yet one that's underutilized. It would have been nice to be able to deal out extra damage when physically striking an enemy with the gun, but unfortunately that's not the case. That pretty much covers any of the weapons you'll find, so let me touch on the meat hooks you call your fists. As far as attacks go, they're everything you'd expect in your basic beat 'em up. B punches and A kicks. They seem to do the same amount of damage, yet kicking obviously gives you better range. Pressing A and B together lets you do a jump kick, although it's pretty difficult to time correctly. I found that most often it makes you more vulnerable because you usually miss, so jump kicks aren't recommended. The only move you can do that strays a bit from the norm is a backwards punch, performed by pressing B in the direction opposite of what you're facing. It's not the most useful move ever created, but there are times where it's pretty useful. The biggest flaw with the game is that it's just too damn difficult. Enemies take way too many punches, even with the brass knuckles. Sometimes you need to strike an enemy a dozen times just for them to fall over once. Most enemies need to fall twice before they are considered defeated. In addition, Bart attacks slowly. There are no punching or kicking combos. It's always the same strike over and over. So as opposed to other beat-em-ups, P.O.W can be considered a bit lacking in that area. Add in that the enemies do a hell of a lot of damage per strike, and you'll probably get a bit frustrated near the end of the game. In addition, there are attacks that will kill you outright. Any bullet strike or grenade blast will kill you immediately. I have no problem with this. It's just one of the bosses, the stage 2 boss. has a freaking shotgun and rolls grenades towards you every time you get close to him. Those are his only 2 attacks. 2 attacks. Both of which are instant kills. Fuck. I honestly couldn't kill him for a while, so I looked online in hopes to get a level select sheet to move on. The only code that is available is a 20 live one. That works for me. So that's what I had to do to progress through and eventually complete the game. Although even that didn't help near the end when you fight this guy again. And he throws grenades at you so quickly that you often respawn on top of the fuckers, killing you before you even get a chance to move. That right there was a huge load of bullshit. You either should have been able to get some sort of respawn protection, or have the enemy wait for you to get your bearings. I wasted about 3 or 4 lives in a row just trying to move out of the way of that bastard's grenades. And who the fuck carries that many grenades with them? Where is he storing them? Up his freaking ass? He's not wearing any kind of special armor or anything. In addition, the game has a pacing problem. I'm fine with how most beat-em-ups work. You move from one side to another, defeating every enemy and then moving on. The issue in this game is that sometimes you'll just take one step and then immediately have to fight another group. Then you may take one more step and get assaulted by 2 guys who run on the screen, throw knives, and then back up. Then 2 steps later, you're ambushed by wimps who throw grenades and run away. This happens more often than it should, and these encounters are telegraphed enough in advance to know that the projectiles thrown are way too easy to avoid. The only exception is the motorcycle riding enemies, and those fuckers knock out half your life per strike. Unless you memorize their positions, they'll be the cause of a lot of frustration in the levels that contain them. Anyway, back to the pacing. The game as a whole just feels slow and monotonous. I hate to say it, but let's go back to Double Dragon. You have experience levels in which you gain new moves. Hell, even when they took that away in the sequels, you still had different skills to perform. And Double Dragon 3 even had multiple characters you can play as. I'm not saying that this game should have copied Double Dragon's formula, but it should have at least gotten a few hints from it. Bosses are also frustrating, at least the human ones. Most of the times when you get near them, they'll just evade away. The easiest way to kill them is to trap them on a wall and just keep pummeling them. Well, that's not very fun. The only 2 bosses that are actually fun are the battles against the helicopter and tank. In each you'll encounter a steady stream of bad guys, and they'll often drop grenades. You need to pick up the grenades and chuck them at the boss. It's actually kind of fun. It's a shame that the rest of the game doesn't end up being just as enjoyable. Another problem with the game is that the enemy AI is hit or miss. Some of them will approach you aggressively and logically. However, some have a tendency to get stuck on things. Some of them will see you as striking one of their pals, go up to hit you, swing a few inches below you and miss, duck back down and repeat a few times until you decide to move. In fact, look at this soldier here. I'm seriously just standing here and he's jumping around, not even making any sort of effort to attack. Alrighty then. The visuals of the game are pretty well done. Every character has some great detail to them. You can even see the small red headband on Bart's head along with 2 wristbands. The backgrounds are all done extremely well and help convey the feeling and atmosphere of the game. When jumping into water, there's some cool splash effects. One thing I don't get is the weird falling animation. Why are the legs sticking up in the air like that? Maybe it's supposed to be that they're lying sideways, but that'd be a little bit weird. Another strange quirk is that Bart fires the M16 from the hip. For a guy who's supposed to be a Special Forces commando, that's a little weird. Bart, you're not an action movie hero. Don't spray and pray. Then we come to the final boss, a big shirtless guy that jumps around like a frickin' circus performer. He does all this while Bart just stands there and calmly kicks him in the balls. He's seriously a pushover, and it's a pathetic final boss for such a difficult game. The ending isn't really worth talking about, other than the horrible congratulation message. P.O.W. is a pretty good game, but its challenge seems to be a bit too high for my liking. Everything just feels a bit too slow and mundane for it to be any fun. Give it a try if you like beat-em-ups, but if you do so, I highly recommend the 20 lives code. Final score? 6 out of 10. This is Reaper. As usual, I am on Facebook at facebook.com/ReapersViews. Happy fragging.